So Claude, welcome on stage. Thank you. Merci, c'est un plaisir de vous avoir.
Merci beaucoup d'avoir bien prononcé.
J'ai essayé.
Excellent. Ah là là. Oops. I always make a mess with water, so that's why I got rid of it. It doesn't go well with the digital tools. The presentation is going to be perhaps a bit radical for some of you because it introduces simple tools like the hand and also a pen. Which I think we forgot. When we draw, we learn about a lot of these things we've been hearing about today. And everything is happening in the drawing at the first minutes that we start to chat with our client. We start to begin to work on the daylighting principles, but also on how we will be feeling in those buildings, how we will think about the ergonomia of light. When we draw a person in the building, you begin to feel how this person is going to behave in the building. It's never standing all the time. Sometimes it's just sitting like what you're doing now. So this is a presentation which I'm presenting with my colleague André Potvin, who's standing in the back. And we are sharing those pieces of work we've been engaging into practice, theory, and also in teaching, which is very important to engage new professionals in the design of new daylighting buildings. So, of course, we want to design, energy-efficient buildings, low-energy buildings. We want to make sure that we have the proper daylighting strategies, but we need to achieve that through specific objectives. And perhaps one of the first important one is to be humanized in certain ways. This way of thinking about low energy in architecture, how people will be engaging in those discussions, and how we will eventually introduce them into the design process, which is very important because everything is happening during the process. Because your client, if you involve your client, everything is going to be flowing in a certain way through the end of the project. And also, perhaps another thing that we tend to forget is the representation of the process and the representation of those ideas to our students, to our clients, to our building professionals, and everything is starting around that. This is a piece of work I've been engaged with my colleague André, of course, and interestingly, and you see this Claude Vallée, who was a professor, one of the clients of the project and initiator of the project, talking about the building, what he said about it. But this is a building where we need to teach about horticultural, about plants. And of course, the most important client of the building were the plants. So it's very difficult to imagine thinking about the basic lead points to get to that very high standard. And I think that was very important into the design process to engage the clients, but also the professional, and to work with tactile way of thinking, meaning drawings and also simple modeling techniques. The guy there in the center with long hair is not a student, but one of the most famous mechanical engineer in Canada, ASHRAE Mechanical Engineer of the Year, and he's actually working with us, with the students, and doing the modeling as well. And the client is there, the maintenance guy is there watching over them, standing, so everybody is engaging in the process because everybody is understanding what is happening around the table. Everybody can understand what is a tactile connection with the building. We've been also doing, of course, modeling techniques. Yes. Simulations, of course, with the engineers and everything that we need to make sure that we include not only visual, but also the thermal aspects and the mechanical systems. But everything is happening in the drawing again, in the section. So we also work on hand calculations because the engineers also like to work with that because you never know what's going to happen in the end. And also what is interesting is that sometimes, the first little drawing on the top, we had several sections that we were exploring. The very basic one, the red one, which was not really very good in Canada because we have snow and everything is a bit different in terms of climate. But we had sometimes to address those issues and to go back and forth to the design process. And what happens at one time is that you need to cut on the project. And sometimes the proposition that we wanted to get rid of becomes the one that we need to think about because it's a lower cost. And this is a very frugal project, I must say, because the budget was quite limited. But eventually, when we did the modeling, we kind of persuaded the client to go with the situation on the right side, because even if it was a little more costly, it was much more interesting for them just by looking in the model. Being given the rating of the terms in terms of lighting, they were kind of confident with all those solutions, whichever was to be chosen. But having to experience the model changed the agenda. Everything changed to something that was more open to the sky, that eventually more open to the sky, as you can see on the left, and also much more related to the views to the top of the trees. And this was felt just by looking in the model. Otherwise, it was very difficult to see that. We could also, eventually, we had simulations, but this was more convincing. The thing is, it seems the truthfulness of the tactile way of dealing with things is an important aspect of the design process in this situation. Interestingly, because we do a lot of teaching at the School of Architecture, we spend like 9 hours a week with the students in the design studio. And sometimes we realize that the model, in terms of truthfulness, also implies that in the image on the right-hand side, you see the complexity of glass patterns, reflections happening, and things that are very difficult to model. At least you would need a little bit of time to achieve that. But here you can actually feel the materials and also the way of dealing with the actual existing light. The right here, right now experience is very important in that state. And on the left, also the client had seen the previous experience done by the students. And also on the left-hand side, you see also the complexity of the glossy finishes, how it implies the enlargement of the aperture. So everything is happening in the reality and the complexity of the space, and that's why it's very interesting to challenge that in our work. We've been also involved in the design-build experiences. Some of you may have seen this work. But what's interesting about this project is that it involved the actual space being lived. It's the ultimate, I could say, fully immersive experience where you can have movable panels that can be sliding and providing state of experiencing a model, almost full size. And what's interesting as well is the non-virtual truthfulness about this experience, because you can feel not only the light, but also the smells of the site. Of course, bird songs and, hearing architecture, a little bit like, Rasmussen's chapter in his book, Experiencing Architecture. And also what's interesting is that the flux are experienced, and you can actually being in response to the fluxes. So when there is a gentle wind, you can, open a panel, and suddenly, if it's cold, you can actually slide it. And what's interesting also about this project is the process, from the very tiny model, which attracts, a hand, to the middle one, to the larger one, and eventually to the full-scale building. And this is very inspiring right now for one of our new projects coming in. I will talk to you about at the end very quickly, Sentinel North. This is another project we've been working on. We were involved in the process of the building and in the surveys. And what you see in the little rectangle over the plan is actually a transitional space, which was meant just to pass from the existing building to the new one. And it is actually too hot in the summertime, too cold in the wintertime. But what happened is that the image of the top is the project just being built. So this is, the image that was famously published in many architectural magazines. And eventually, it got crowded with plants and people sitting there and actually working with computers. So my student measured the visual comfort, which was just intolerable all the time. And it's one of the best spaces where people want to meet. So they actually invaded a space which was not meant to be a space to be working in. And actually, the experience of the space transformed its occupancy. Another way of measuring a space is usually in daylighting, we measure the daylighting, of course, but also we're interested in the color, the texture, and also the feeling of the material. So here in this study, the student was measuring wood and non-wood spaces because we are part of a chair on ecological wood design, wood construction. And what's interesting is this important aspect of touching with your eyes, which was monitored also in questionnaires, and also the empreinte, the hand leaving an empreinte on the wood, which is pretty much different than the other one. And because we're working with industries, with actual finishes, it was important for us to use the material in our work. So building the models, we had to go to these different glosses, different finishes on the surfaces, and we were able to classify them a little bit like I've done over the years on scales of, in this particular research on scales of warm versus cool colors, and comparing overcast versus sunlighting conditions. And this research about monitoring the physical aspects of light becomes interesting into the actual experience of visual experience of a space. So we have 5 models being simultaneously experienced. And this student came up with the scale of skies, which deals not only with the sky cover, but also the cloud thickness. And over the couple of days where the simulations were occurring, you can see that the color of the space is very much changing. There is no pure overcast sky all the time, and the sunny sky in Quebec is kind of something like Pim's time in England, like it's not always a long time, so there is much of in-between happening as well. And as you see here, it's the same. The yellowish colors are actually the same finish, but the different colors, the different blend of palettes. And one of the presenters yesterday, Benish, talked about the reflected light. So reflected light is also an important component of well-being because it connects us with the actual experience of color. Oops. In the design studio, we have here all the students participating in the integration of design. And we have to break the rule here because they've been doing a lot of simulations, and afterwards we decide to engage them into ice, because it's in January, the studio starts in January, with ice models here, and eventually they translate the experience. We engage them in doing models, which will be dealing with environmental fluxes. So here we talk about the wind and how it also addressed into simulations. Here, the experience with ice deals with the opacity and transparency, where you can eventually think about the rehumanization of, here the facade, where it's being seen. And eventually, what is important is to connect those metrics that we use in the BIM softwares and other softwares as well with the reality of a site. So we engage students doing those measurements. And here is a remnant of the thesis we've finished under the supervision of Dean Hawks, which is the next speaker. So André is wearing this tactile tool of measuring the in situ environment, and also the exploration of the virtual plane, which was quite a novelty in '91, so that was my thesis. And finally, this new project that we're having, so many of us will be intrigued, introducing medical science, architecture, and optical science into the integration of new tools to produce light for well-being. Thank you very much.